Hello and welcome to this course which is dedicated to the Semi-Slav Defense. In this course I would like to show you the most popular lines from Black's point of view and how to react against all the possible setups for White. And as you know probably, the Semi-Slav Defense arises after d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, let's say knight f3, c6. And there are different move orders. For example, sometimes Black can start with second move c6, which is from Slav defense. But then instead of playing bishop f5 or bishop g4, he can play e6. Or Black can start with the Queen's Gambit, d5, e6, knight f6, and then to play c6. But this mixture of the both openings, Slav defense and Queen's Gambit, is called Semi-Slav Defense. The last move order, which is possible, is to start with this so-called triangle system, d5, e6, c6, and then to go knight f6. What we have to know in this situation? White has, of course, many possible moves and deviations, but I have divided this course to 3 chapters. In the first I will show you how to play against probably the most common move, which is bishop g5. Then we're going to see the lines with e3, and then in the first chapter all the other possibilities for White. So let's start with the move bishop g5. Now White wants to play just like in the Queen's Gambit. But here the slight difference is that the pawn is already on c6, which is giving now Black possibility, in case he wants, to capture the pawn on c4. And this is here the choice which Black has to make. He has to choose between knight bd7, bishop e7, pawn takes, c4, probably there are some other moves as well, like bishop b4 or h6. And what to do here? I think the most ambitious move is to take or to play h6. So let's start with the move h6. What is the idea of this move? Obviously is to attack the bishop, and now White has to choose between bishop h4 and bishop takes f6. In case of bishop takes f6, Black has to take with the queen. And then the plan is to play knight d7. At some moment, depends if White will play e4 or he will play the pawn to e3. Black can take with the pawn on d5 to c4 or to e4, if needed to retreat the queen, and then he can prepare later the moves like c5 or e5. Usually White plays e3. If he goes now e4 in this position, Black can take the pawn on e4 and then to play bishop b4 check. And White doesn't have a good reply on this, he has to retreat the knight. That's why usually he prefers to play e3. Now, instead of playing the bishop on e7, usually here Black is playing the knight to d7, because he is keeping the option for this bishop to go later on d6 or on b4. And knight d7 is a useful move. Now if White takes on d5, you should take with e-pawn. Usually he doesn't take, because this way he is keeping the pawn on e6, and then the bishop is less active on this diagonal, for example, now. And here Black has various plans again, but because White is preparing e4, and it will be anyway hard to keep the pawn on d5, that's why now he takes on c4, taking advantage of the fact that White has already moved his bishop on d3, and now he has to make one additional move. And after bishop c4, once again the different setups like bishop d6 and e5, b6, bishop b7, bishop b4, but I think the most common is the move g6. And then the Black wants to put his bishop on g7, and the queen will retreat in case she is attacked from the pawn with e4, e5, or from the knight. Now white usually goes castle, and after bishop g7, there are various moves for white, but what we have to know, let's say after rook c1, which is the main line, black should play castle obviously, and now he wants to push e5. And even if white pushes e4, e5 is still possible, because now if white decides to take on e5 twice with the pawn and with the knight, black takes also twice with the knight and with the queen, and this way he will open this diagonal for the bishop from g7. So usually white prefers to push d5 in order to close the bishop and of course to get this passed pawn. And now black goes knight b6. And here, if the bishop retreats, black has the option to take on d5, or to play bishop g4, depends which way the bishop will retreat. And white has this interesting idea to take on c6, and now he's taking advantage of the fact that if you take the bishop, he will go knight d5, and then he's attacking the knight and the queen, and you cannot take on c6 because of knight e7 check, and then white will just capture the knight. So we have to take on c6, and now already he has to retreat, and because bishop g4 is very annoying threat, he has to go to e2. And I think now black has a good game. He has the pair of bishops, he has this pawn on c6, which is a bit weak, but this is not so dangerous because he can defend it very easily with the rook from c8. And then you can move sometimes this bishop to f8, and then to try to go to c5 or d4, or you can go h5, bishop h6, and then after taking on d3 you can try to jump on d2 with your rook. So black has, I think, very good compensation for the fact that he has this weak pawn, and this line is not considered as something too dangerous for black. Now, if the bishop retreats, in this case after h6, what to do next? Of course, you can still revert to the main lines in the queen's gambit with bishop e7 and knight bd7, but you have this option now to take this pawn on c4. And now white can either play e4, or he can play this very common idea a4. If he plays a4 in order to prevent b5, then you can play the bishop to b4 first to pin the knight, and after e3 you still, I think, can defend this pawn with b5. Of course, black has also various options, but I'm showing you, I think, the most direct and the most popular one. b5, this is something which usually white doesn't like too much, because now he's playing with the pawn down. And although he has, of course, good compensation, still not everybody is happy to play with the pawn down. And here the plan for black is quite simple. He wants to develop the knight to d7, to castle, to bring the queen, maybe to b6, let's say knight e5, knight d7. Now white has to try to activate his pieces, so he is trying usually f4. And after queen b6, black is ready to castle. And the game is very complicated, but I think the fact that black has an extra pawn is good for him. So the game is very complicated, but I think white is risking a bit more. So now we go to the main line after pawn takes, which is the move e4. Now obviously white wants to take with the bishop on c4. With the move b5, the game can transpose to the Botvinnik line, which we will see later, but instead of playing b5, black has another move, which is to play directly g5. So this way he is avoiding Botvinnik, and after bishop g3, now already he can play b5. And he managed to protect his pawn, Of course, he has exposed a little bit his king side with this h6 g5, but once again the game is very complicated, and in not so many openings you can have such a position as black where you are already pawn up and you have created some unclear position. Usually, black has to try to equalize in the first 10 moves. That's why many people are happy to play such a positions with black, because it gives them good chances to get the initiative or to play for a win. Now white has many possibilities, but the most common are bishop e2 and knight e5. Knight e5 is an attempt to activate immediately the knight and try to prevent moves like knight d7. So white now is attacking the pawn on c6, and it seems that black cannot develop the knight. But actually, still, many top players are playing the move here, knight bd7, so this is possible move. Because this knight on e5 is very strong, and that's why usually black wants to trade him. What will happen if white takes the pawn? After knight takes, queen b6, the knight is under attack. Now the pawns are equal, but black managed to develop his knight and his queen until the white knight was busy to take the pawn back. So now the best move for white is to push d5. But after bishop b7, black is keeping his development all the time, and he is ready to take this knight. And here white has to be a bit careful. He has to find the best moves like a4 now. So in case of b4, there will be knight b5 and then knight c7 is the threat. Black usually goes a6. And now after bishop e2, black should take this knight. Pawn takes, queen takes. And again he is with the extra pawn. White is hoping, of course, to put the pressure on the big diagonal. So he's playing now usually e5, preparing bishop f3. For example, you cannot take the pawn on g2 because of bishop f3. So the best move is this one. And after knight takes, now I think black has to take with the queen. So the best which white can do is to take the pawn back. But now after bishop b4 check, he is losing his castle. And after knight c5, for example, I think black has a good endgame because he is going to take the pawn back. He has active minor pieces. The knight will jump to e4. He will have active rook as well. So this is, I think, around equal position. The alternative for white is here after b5, the move bishop e2. Now black has different possibilities. He can play bishop b7, bishop g7, knight d7. There are many games in this line. I will show you the two most popular lines. Bishop b7 is the main move, which now is giving white to choose between castle, the normal move, and the move h4. For example, if he plays h4, this is a little bit more maybe attacking move. Now black is forced to push g4, and then he goes knight e5, attacking the pawn on g4. And just like in the previous example, once again black should not try to protect his pawn, and he should meet immediately this knight with knight d7. Now for white it's not good to take the pawn on g4, and usually he's trying this now very interesting idea. Knight takes d7, queen takes d7, and now bishop e5 pinning the knight. The best move here for black is to move the queen to e7, not the bishop. So usually people go queen e7. And now there are different ideas for white, but what black has to do? Black has to play anyway rook to g8 on the next move, and then he can try to move the knight back to d7. if white tries to attack his pawns with b3 or something like this, he should play rook g8 and then knight d7. There is a line here, for example, b3, in which black is not taking the pawn on b3, but he is simply playing rook g8. Because now if white takes on c4, black can play b4, and then the pawn will be under attack. So the line goes something like this: queen c2 to protect the pawn, and then knight d7 to attack the bishop. So the bishop has to retreat. And here black has this very interesting idea. Instead of taking on b3 and to open the c file, and then white will have a dangerous initiative on this pawn, he can try the move b4. And after the knight moves, he can play c3. And he has this dangerous pass pawn, which he can keep this way with a5. And the game is very, very complicated. Of course, white has good compensation because most of his pieces are very active. And you can see the black pieces, they are not so active for the moment. But after the move like h5, in order to protect the pawn, the bishop now could go to h6, for example, if white goes here. And slowly black will be able to develop his pieces. And then he is with a pawn up, which is also defended pass pawn, so the game is very, very complicated. If white tries to play immediately castle instead of b3, once again you have the same idea, rook g8. And white has to play b3 because there is nothing else, otherwise what to do. And you can play the same things here, b4, c3, knight d7, h5. Those are the main ideas here for black. So this is the line with h4. If he plays instead h4 castle, then of course there is no need to play such a move like g4, rook g8. You can simply develop with the knight. And now white should either go knight e5, this is the most popular move, or he can have to push d5 at some moment. If he tries to play d5 now, in order to open some files against your king, here you have to take with the c pawn. White has to take with the pawn, and then knight takes. If he takes the knight, of course you take with the bishop. If he takes on b5, then you have to play, I think, a6. And now the best thing maybe for white is to give this check, otherwise he has to retreat. And after knight d6, there has been many games. Sometimes black go knight b6, sometimes he goes queen b6. But in most of the lines, black has a very good game, so there is nothing to worry. He has extra pawn. And white has, of course, the pair of bishops, but it's not clear is it enough compensation for white.